What was it like when you joined a very early stage organization, Caratlane in Chennai in 2007? At that time, startups were an unknown thing. What made you take that call?
All middle class Indians of our age, we were told that you go get a good education and get an MNC job and your life will be set. I did all of that and then I realized my life was not set, so I was extremely unhappy. When Caratlane came along, I thought it is one way for me to finally switch industries or careers or functions, whichever way you say it. When you are starting a business where there's going to be a lot of hard times, right?
Exactly.
And pressure, so sometimes, just working with people, who you get along with, I think really helps thoda easen the load.
What were the couple of things that you think really worked in terms of building the organization initially?
So one, we couldn't get a lot of very smart people. And, before we got to the real problem of finding customers, we had the problem of finding people to work for us.
What is the one big mistakes or a few mistakes that you people did that you will caution everyone against now, all the startups?
पैसा आ जाता है ना, मतलब आपका decision of what to do and what not to do, which is important for the business, should not change too much.
I'm very happy to welcome Avnish Anand here to the second episode of The Mandate. Avnish is my batchmate from IIM Lucknow. I have known him for more than half my life. And apart from being my batchmate, he's also a very senior leader from the industry. He actually joined Caratlane as the first employee in 2007, then later on became the co-founder and then the chief operating officer and then the CEO. Till the time it was finally acquired by Titan and Tanish completely. So, Avnish, welcome to the mandate. I hope that the next hour or so would help all of us get a few insights on how to shape up our hiring and our careers also in India. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Ankur. Matlab, like you said, we have known each other for such a long time. So I'm sure, like all our other conversations, we are going to have a good chat.
Yes, unfortunately, now you're stuck with my jokes for the next 2 hours.
I've enjoyed that. No, I know all your jokes.
Okay, so first thing, what was it like when you joined a very early stage organization in Caratlane in Chennai in 2007? At that time, startups were an unknown thing. What made you take that call? How did you actually have the guts to take that decision? That was not a small decision, I can tell everyone
See,
here.
I'll tell you the reality is that, like all middle class Indians of our age, we were told that you go get a good education and get an MNC job and your life will be set. I did all of that and then I realized my life was not set. So I was extremely unhappy. Uh, my wife and one of our friends, Nimish, were both in Bharat Matrimony and I thought their job was far more interesting. But we have this, so I wanted to get into consumer internet initially or in a startup. The problem is that in India, we have this problem of relevant experience. So, I went through that myself, that everybody would say, but you don't have the relevant experience. I would wonder, ki, bhai, if I don't get a job, how will I get the relevant experience? So when Caratlane came along, I thought it is one way for me to finally switch industries or careers or functions, whichever way you say it. And it was into retail and it was going to be an internet company. So that was one reason, because I thought that if nothing happens out of this startup also, at least I'll get a couple of years of relevant experience, which will finally help me to move into consumer internet or retail proper, which I wanted to do always. And when you're very young, ek to you take less risk, rather you take more risk. Second thing, no, actually I didn't know anybody who could talk me out of it, because nobody knew about the risks of a startup, because there was nobody around to even tell you ki why you should not join.
Okay, that's
so
interesting.
ignorance was a bliss in that sense.
Okay.
Luckily, I think my wife and my parents are very supportive, and they said ki theek hai, whatever will happen, even if it means supporting you financially, we'll do it for a while. So rather than saying why I wanted to join, I was in a way, what I didn't want to do, I was clear. And this at least was something which was not meeting the criteria of something I didn't want to do. And sometimes, like I said, when you don't know about anything, then you say, chalo, theek hai. And when you're young, you take those chances.
Yes. Yes.
So that is how I ended up over there. And, वहाँ पे फिर what happened कि some other people were also supposed to join. So we were supposed to be 4-5 लोगों का founding team. unfortunately or fortunately, nobody else was willing to take that chance. I think they had friends who advised them out of it or whatever. So instead of चार लोग, I was the only one, and it meant कि there was nobody with any expertise of building consumer internet or retail businesses. So you anyways had to learn and do it. So I got like a second MBA education or a second education into how to start or build a company, because there was
Okay.
no playbook which existed in India. There was no
Of course, there was
experts
nothing.
which were there in our company because nobody had joined. And therefore, the company also was more, I would say, gave me a longer rope in terms of saying, chalo, theek hai, we need to take time. And the biggest thing, there was no investor who was breathing down our neck कि things have to be moved quickly. So we were, building it in a very slow, capital efficient manner from the beginning. So I think it was like a perfect situation that way. Ki while there was some downside but very limited, and there was a lot of upside in various ways for me. So I think it was there is, I don't want to do a correction in hindsight and say I wanted to do this or whatever. I was just doing it because I was not happy doing what I was doing. And I think the final very important part, which people sometimes again don't appreciate enough, that when we had when I had my conversation with Mithun, it was a 2 hour conversation where I think 1.5 hours was spent on sports ka discussion. Because I used to blog about sports then. He noticed that I think that was the only thing which he found interesting in my resume possibly. So imagine in a 2 hour conversation you discuss sports for more than 1 hour. So both of us then, you when you find common ground like that, based on, the likeness principle, I think both of us
Yes.
liked each other. So that also meant, you thought, Kare, this is a young person. He's only a year older than me. So you thought, I think we'll enjoy working together. Kuch nahi, agar business ka hoga, at least we'll have good conversations on sports. So you don't know how, all of these things sometimes
No,
end up
interesting. In
changing your
fact,
life.
I think there are two takeaways from this thing that you just mentioned. One is that if you want to do something which is not there, there is always a cost. You said that the downside was limited, but actually you gave up an upside. So when you took the call to join Caratlane, it was an unknown entity, and you said, "Okay, I have to get into consumer internet. So if nothing else, I'll get an entry." So that was the price you were willing to pay, which is
Yeah.
a very, very big takeaway for everyone who's hearing this. Most of us are afraid to pay the price of entry. We want to get everything, but without working for it. So that is one thing. The second thing, the likeness principle, which is something I keep telling people that I work with, that if you can't have a vibe match, to use this very Gen Z lingo, how do you live with them for the next 5 years, 10 years? Because you're going to spend more time with your co-founder or with your key team members than almost anyone else in your next foreseeable future. So if there is something on which you can talk about without having to think, then as it is, I think 50-70% of the problem is solved.
See, actually, if you think about it, and more so when you are starting a business where there's going to be a lot of hard times, right?
Exactly.
And pressure. So sometimes, just working with people, who you get along with, I think really helps thoda easen the load, right? Obviously, the fact is that you should also be objective with each other, and you should be able to push each other. Matlab, not at the cost of work. Matlab, it's not ki we are not good at working
Of
with each
course.
other, and just because we get along. I don't know, agar if I can again borrow from a book which I think is something I keep going back to called Radical Candor.
Okay.
So one of the things they say, right, ki you should, with the people you work with, no, you have to accept their whole, not just their professional self. I think when you have that other non-professional side also, like conversations happening, that is how you get to know the whole of the other person, which means ki you know when to push and when not to push, and when to support and when not to, or when you don't have to. And I think, if you really have to live the principles of radical candor, then I think that also only happens when you are seeing that person as a whole, and you have these other conversations also. You can't just be talking dhanda all the time.
No, no, that is important. In fact, as you said, it's a high pressure thing, so you have to keep pushing at things,
Yeah.
pushing at each other. But this makes it easier because, like we say, na ho gaya sab kuch, chal ab baith ke daru peete, ho gaya. We'll fight it out again tomorrow. And unless there is a common ground, unless you can spend that time offline, it's going to be a challenge. Yes, I totally buy that one, and I hope people who are seeing this, hearing this, they also get it.
In fact, there's one more point I
Okay.
want to just share, because this is again a very standard bias. There were two founders at that point. Mithun, who had no corporate background, so he was again uncorrupted by the way the corporate world works.
Okay.
And without any disrespect, there was Srinivasa Gopalan, IIM Ahmedabad. He was the CEO at SIFI, so ekdam great corporate pedigree.
Okay.
So he was using all the corporate filters. Luckily for me, because we went to IIM Lucknow, we had at least one of the standard filters of the corporate world.
Yes.
So which is why he kind of was okay with my coming on board.
Candidature, yeah.
हाँ. And then whatever MNC background, ये सब जो भी, so he liked that, and we had a regular, very corporate-ish interview. And this other person who comes in who has no such background, no such baggage, he was not at all asking me any of that. I don't even know whether it mattered for him or not. And he's just asking about sports. So I think, what I think I learned later, you have to go beyond those standard proxies or standard filters. I think a conversation, like when you're talking about sports, for example, it also gives you a much better insight into a person also. Because corporate interview, the standard questions ke liye everybody is very well prepared.
Yes.
The answers are very standard. So, when you take them on unfamiliar territory, for a part which they have not prepared for, I think it's also a more, it gives you better information about that person also, who that person is.
Yes, and frankly, you want someone who has some passion, even if it is not what you are doing.
Yeah, especially if you're going to start a business
Yes.
where you have to be irrational, you have to be delusional. So you need people who have the tendency to do that sometimes.
Yes. I often remember asking this question, what do you like to do? They will say, read. Okay, which was the last book you read? 5 point someone. Chetan Bhagat. So this was 2005, 6, 7, and I was like, boss, is that all you have read? No disrespect to Bhagat, but there is so much more to reading.
नहीं, the same question, if you ask people about curiosity, तो आजकल सबको ये मालूम है कि ये क्वेश्चन बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, और उससे पहले हम पूछेंगे ना कि ठीक है, ऑन अ स्केल ऑफ 1 to 10 हाउ क्यूरियस वुड यू से यू आर, तो लोग अपने आप को मॉडेस्टली 10 नहीं बोलेंगे, बट दिल से 8 या 9,
आराम से,
एंड देन यू जस्ट आस्क देम कि टेल मी व्हाट इज द लास्ट रैबिट होल. पहले तो लोग गूगल सर्च करते थे, अब AI पे कि जहाँ पे यू स्पेंड लाइक हाफ एन आवर. But and the whole point of curiosity is that curiosity is inefficient, which means that you are doing it without any purpose or any benefit. You are
Exactly.
just acting emotionally and just getting carried away. So if you tell me, if you can't come up with something, that means you are not given to those getting carried away. And if you come up with something, which is like a logical business thing which you were doing, then boss, then you are. So that is how I think people get
Yes.
found out.
Yes, very correct. Okay, so let's move on a bit. How was it at the early days in Caratlane? How was it in a young organization? What were the things? Let me put a crystal question there. What were the couple of things that you think really worked in terms of building the organization initially?
Okay, so I think two things happened. See, one, like I said, we were not able to create like a great rock star team. Today, if you think about it, like 19 years on from when Caratlane was created, today if somebody is starting a business, they have some capital or they've got some investment, or they are a big name, they will be able to attract people, because today joining a startup which is funded or whatever, a cool idea has enough takers.
Yes.
Right? So one, we couldn't get a lot of very smart people. And before we got to the real problem of finding customers, we had the problem of finding people to work for us. So what happened in that is that then you had no choice. You have to hire who was willing to join, right? So in a way, it was also a good experience for us. You have to work with what we have, and many of them didn't come with the ideal, I would say, experience and education background which we would have wanted. So you had to work with people who were not like your ideal profile. So it gave you a good sense, how do you work with them, and then when you because you had that opportunity, you discovered other strengths which you were not aware of initially. So that was very, very important. Okay. The second thing is कि obviously that whole learning part, right? कि you realize कि आपको जो चीज़ नहीं आती है, जिसके लिए usually you hire an expert, but then sometimes you have to learn it on your own and you have to do it on your own.
Yes.
Okay. Benjamin Graham has this excellent article कि when you are a very small business, no, you should do things which are unscalable, because that is the advantage of a startup at that point in time, right?
Yes.
And it's a very well read essay which
Paul
everybody.
Graham.
Sorry, not
Paul
Benjamin
Graham.
Graham, Paul
Yes.
Graham. So obviously we had not read that essay and we were not aware of it, but we kind of ended up doing that in the beginning. And one of the things which we did, also because we didn't have enough customers, was extreme level of customer experience and customer service. Like to the extent ki if a because you would get one inquiry that day, so you would literally go to their home if it was possible, if that person was in Chennai, and then everything was done in like a 10-star level, not even 5-star. Today people aspire for a 5-star, but when you get a one customer or one lead a day, you try and give a 10-star experience. And because this was done by everybody, like we were all so desperate for business that whether it was Mithun or me or Kalai who came after that or some of the others, everybody was acting like that. So ek tarah se na, that culture got created that we have to be obsessive about the customer no matter what. And like I said, right, this is an unscalable thing. So the as an SOP or as a protocol or as a way of doing business, that was unscalable and obviously it couldn't continue. But the culture got created of customer obsession and that scaled. Like the first 10 people, because we were doing like that, वैसा हुआ, so that the next 20 and the next 50 and the next 100 and the next 1000, they all learned from what was already established or what was the way of doing things in the company. So that customer obsession ka culture got created and that grew very, very organically. And it was later we read Paul Graham. But anyways, wo I think was a big win, because it's very hard to create that kind of culture later when you're big, right? And when you get a lot of people who come from other organizations which might not be like that. And I think again, this is something which very few people realize. This was one of the big strengths of the business of what we did on experience and customer obsession, and a lot of things which we were able to do well came from that core
But then you were
customer
leading,
obsession.
but then you were leading by example, right? You were doing what you wanted them to do, and they saw from you, and
Yeah,
they followed
so I'm
the.
saying कि एक तरह से with at a small scale you got that going, थोड़ा
Of course.
momentum हो गया. So then, as in like the 2-3 of us influenced the next 10, and then when the next 50 people came, they were influenced by the first 15. When the next 200 people came, they were influenced by the first 50. So there was always enough critical mass to say this is the Caratlane way.
Yes. Was there any hiring decision that you thought you should have taken earlier? Again, like something like, what is a role that you hired for a bit later than you thought you should have, or a role that you hired very early and you actually didn't need that role at that time? Something like that happened?
See, very interestingly, उस समय, so when we started, there was no store का plan initially, so no retail person initially to start with. There was one function which today has become such an important function and was, I think, a little more important pre-AI, which is product management. So there was no product management function which we knew also कि ऐसा भी कोई function होता है, right? And I ended up playing that without even realizing ki what am I doing and whether it's going to be called product management. And
There was
then
no name to
eventually
that,
I ended up leading that function in Caratlane. Okay. So you could argue that we should have had somebody for product management, but I think I was very lucky ki because there was nobody, I got that chance. Okay. Similarly, we didn't have customer experience. We didn't have a data analytics person. And I'm not saying that a startup at the beginning of the day needs these separate experts, but these expertise is needed. So the same person could come with some of these expertise. What it does is that the learning curve for a new company is reduced significantly when you know some of this. I'll tell you, when we did marketing also, initially we didn't have like a very strong digital marketing person. So we have done enough Bevkoofis initially. Okay. And so in that sense, I think that people with a little more expertise would have definitely helped.
Okay.
Although I am the biggest beneficiary of that. But one good thing which happened for us, no, because we didn't have a lot of money, so that itself limited the number of Bevkoofis which we could have done.
So the experiments couldn't become very
The
expensive.
very expensive experiments couldn't happen, and we did everything slowly. Yeah. So actually वो वो time ऐसा था ना कि today the what kind of expertise is needed for a startup is also well known. So you also know what you should have had and what you shouldn't have had. उस समय it was not even known कि क्या चाहिए. जैसे now I think about it कि a supply chain person or at least a logistics person would have helped. But there was nobody, like if you tried to find a logistics person, because there was no online business, so there was no online shipping or logistics other than Rediff and India Times. तो आप किसको खोजते भी? तो while technically you could argue that those skill sets might have been useful, but where there's those people with those skill sets itself
It
didn't
just
exist
did not
then.
exist.
Yeah. So I think from that time when we were there, I think I would not say too much other than possibly say a better marketing person possibly. But today, if we were building Caratlane and we
Yes.
started with that team, I think it would be a mistake.
Okay.
And we would need a little more expertise on, so you need a strong performance marketing person, you need a logistics person, possibly a product management person. The funniest thing is that we took a year to build our website. I think that definitely we could have done with better people. But wo time pe there was no Shopify. But even then, I think 1 year was too long.
Especially if you were a online business.
Yeah. And sometimes people laugh at it कि एक साल कैसे लगा तो what were you doing type.
Exactly. I'm laughing now. But ठीक है. Slow and steady gets us there.
So imagine इतना luxury था time का क्योंकि there was no competition also, right? Like imagine कि if that was such a happening idea, like जैसे today जैसे vertical quick commerce is like that, right? If 20 people were getting funded, then I'm sure कि we couldn't have had that luxury कि आराम से एक साल website बना रहे हैं.
Acha, and again, you also quit Caratlane in
Yeah.
some time, and this is a very important point I want people to realize. You quit. Why did you quit?
So, like I was in Chennai for 7 years in total. Before Caratlane also I was in Chennai.
Yeah.
And again in India we have this mindset कि घर के पास parents के पास रहना चाहिए.
Yes.
Right? So that was an important factor.
Yes.
So while before we had kids, we were okay with that. We were having a great time in Chennai. We had friends, we had some family also. And Chennai is a great place, by the way. It had nothing to do with Chennai per se. But we thought कि when we had our child, then we thought कि now we should
They
move
should be
closer
closer
to
to
our family and
grandparents,
parents
etc.
and
should have
etc.
access.
So that was one thing. And we thought कि if she got raised in Delhi, she would at least learn Hindi. She might not learn. But the reality is कि वो तब भी हिंदी नहीं सीखी. So that was one factor. And because honestly, like I said, right, one of the things always in my mind was कि this might lead me to other opportunities. So it actually happened.
Okay.
It actually happened that when I was leaving Caratlane, like I had each and every consumer internet company, including Naukri or any other place, I had offers from all of those places,
Okay.
right? So it actually played out like that. And the reality is कि उस समय, nobody, could even again tell you कि, Caratlane ऐसा बन सकता है, इतना आपका wealth creation हो सकता है, या ये name fame ये जो भी, because we were still very small, although it had been 3.5 years approximately. 1 crore के आसपास का monthly revenue होगा, including our B2B revenue, a little more than that possibly. So it was not, like looking like the next great retail revolutionary disruptive company in the country which would change my life as it later did. So you thought कि I'm not going to miss out on anything. ठीक है, ESOP है, लेकिन उस समय ESOP का भी आपको क्या value समझ में भी नहीं आता था. So again you felt कि I got everything which I wanted. I had a great time. Now I'm getting these opportunities I wanted. I learned so much. So imagine because of my Caratlane experience, somebody was willing to give me the product management function का jobs. So I was कि ठीक है, we'll go to Delhi, we'll raise our kids over there, close to family, in consumer internet. So all the boxes of what you
Were
wanted
getting
out of
ticked,
it were getting ticked.
Okay. But then you returned. And that is the important. What made that happen?
So again, I think while I think I again learned a lot of things in a more in a bigger consumer internet organizations, because they had more experts on things. But I think I was not again. I think मेरा DNA में ही बड़ा company में काम करना नहीं है. Right? I think I am a complete misfit. So those same things happened. They were, it was not the best place, at least for my type of person. There was, I think more bureaucracy and politics
And
that
I
I
think
could
when you say
handle.
bada company, you actually mean a bureaucratic organization because you can be large, but you can still be
At least I
growing
would
and
say
be.
the type of large companies which existed back in the day, they were like that.
Yes.
Okay. And I had enough fights with everybody and enough things which I pushed and I kept doing it. And I sometimes feel कि उस समय पे ना I was very delusional. Because sometimes I think ना कि why didn't I leave earlier? But you know, I had this thing कि ना I can't leave without proving कि we can still do something amazing over here. And I remember कि every day I used to come late या you know would work on weekends and my wife would ask me कि ना what is wrong with you, मतलब और तो कोई ऐसा कर नहीं रहा है, क्यों ऐसा कर रहा है? And I would say कि नहीं ये no लगे हुए हैं. And I'm glad कि I didn't, I would say get corrupted by the culture, okay, and I maintained what I had. And you know what happened कि while I left Caratlane, Mithun and I stayed in touch. And he would call a lot of times to take matlab ask questions, or I would also sometimes call him for if I needed something. So we had stayed in touch, okay. And then I went and saw the other side of while I got what I wanted from Carrot Lane, but I had assumed that you know while I would get the consumer internet company, I would also enjoy the culture. But I realized that all big companies, at least at that point in time, were the same. So I was not happy. And then what happened ki the one win which I wanted to show, to prove to myself, not to anybody, that yahan pe bhi I can do, that happened when we did Code Gladiators. Okay. So I got the win and I was not enjoying it. And I had actually moved from Carrot Lane to another, from Times to another startup called My Refers. And उसके बाद actually वहाँ पे there was some other issue over there, so I was actually going to interview in some other startup. And I called Mithun for a ref check. By the time what had happened कि Mithun had also realized कि he couldn't run the company out of Chennai only, and he needed more talent and he needed people in Bombay. So they had decided to open an office in Bombay. So this is how the conversation went कि, and it's on WhatsApp कि I'm asking him कि Mithun मेरे को एक रेफ चेक कराना है, तो कैन यू गिव मी द रेफ चेक? ही सेज व्हाई डोंट यू कम बैक टू कैरेट लेन? एंड देन आई एम सेइंग कि मिथुन आई कांट गो बैक टू चेन्नई. देन आई थॉट कि मिथुन बैंगलोर चलेगा क्या? एंड पैरेलली आई एम चैटिंग विद माई वाइफ कि मिथुन ऐसा ऐसा बोल रहा है. एंड उस समय तक हम लोग को ये था कि नहीं, एंड वी हैड बॉट अ हाउस एंड ऑल्दो दैट हाउस वाज फ्रॉम जेपी एंड वी हैव स्टिल
Still
नॉट
not
गॉट
got
दैट
it. Yeah,
हाउस.
I know that.
It's been 11 years, but at least you thought कि घर मिल जाएगा and we'll settle down in Delhi. And she's saying ना कि हम लोग को दिल्ली में क्या मिला है? All the things which you wanted, ठीक है, फैमिली तो आ ही जाएगा. So then I said to Mithun, Bangalore होगा. Then he said नहीं, Bombay चलेगा. And then we said, and all my life now I had not wanted to go to Bombay because I used to think कि Bombay में there will be 2 hour travel and छोटा घर, and we were used to coming from a small town कि थोड़ा फैल के रहने की आदत थी. And then we just decided on the spur of the moment, after having resisted Bombay and not wanting to leave Delhi in 2 minutes, yes, we'll go to Bombay types. Because you know, that the way it was going, I think we were not happy with that. So that's how it changed. Ki he had the trust in me,
Exactly.
and I also had trust in him. And you know, I finally, I think, you know, जैसे A/B टेस्ट होता है ना, तो पहले मैंने एक बार बड़ी कंपनीज में काम किया, फिर एक छोटी कंपनी में काम किया, फिर एक कंज्यूमर इंटरनेट वाली बड़ी कंपनी में. दोनों जो वेरिएबल था, राइट, पहले शायद लगता था कि इंडस्ट्री के कारण प्रॉब्लम हो रहा है.
Yes.
बट देन यू सॉ कि नहीं, इंडस्ट्री चेंज करने पे भी सर्टन बिग कंपनीज आर लाइक दैट ओनली.
Yes.
So just like you do in any experiment, no, where you look at data, I think all the combinations showed me that not only consumer internet, but the startup and the culture of the startup was most important for me. And then I think it was very clear to me that now I don't have to go anywhere else, and we are willing to just, by the time we had our second child, we'll just leave and go and we'll figure out life in Bombay.
Super.
And that's what happened.
And that is the point I wanted to make. So, founders, if you're listening to this, if you have had a partner, a co-founder, a key employee who has moved out because of any reason, if they've been there with you when you are building things up, they are going to be your best partners when you are actually scaling up to the next level. And it takes a lot of humility, it takes a lot of openness to be able to ask someone again कि भाई तू आ जा वापस. लोग कहते हैं, but it is not easy. It is not easy at all.
And I'll tell you one more thing.
हाँ.
ये और भी इंटरेस्टिंग है बाय द वे, कि सो मिथुन के साथ ना ऐसा कोई मतलब बहुत दिन तक कोई ऑफर लेटर भी नहीं आया था, वर्बली बात हुआ था. ठीक है. एंड देन आई सेड कि मिथुन रोल क्या होगा, तो ही सेड ना कि डोंट वरी अबाउट द रोल, विल फिगर आउट समथिंग. क्योंकि उस समय क्लियर नहीं था कि क्या करेंगे, बिकॉज फॉर obviously that company had gotten funded, and then
Yeah.
when the funding comes, you make mistakes and you hire a lot of people. So all of that had happened. So we had people for every function. So there was no senior role which was available. But again, because of the mutual trust, he said कि
Exactly.
we'll figure out something. तो इनफैक्ट हम शुरू में जब हम कैरेट लेन आए भी, तो सबको को बहुत लोग सुने थे मेरे बारे में कि आई वॉज देयर एंड जो भी, एंड मिथुन से आई वॉज क्लोज एंड ऑल ऑफ दैट, एंड आई वॉज अ सीनियर पर्सन. उस समय वी वर दिस सीनियर वाइस प्रेसिडेंट, सबको मिलता था डेजिग्नेशन. एंड एवरीबडी वुड वंडर कि व्हाट इज ही गोइंग टू डू. एंड पहला 1-2 महीना तो यही होता था कि एवरीबडी वुड आस्क मी कि अपनी व्हाट आर यू डूइंग टाइप्स, एंड आई वुड हाँ, आई एम फिगरिंग आउट टाइप्स. जस्ट इमेजिन कि यू जस्ट गेट वन सीनियर पर्सन एंड विदाउट क्लैरिटी कि क्या करना है.
And जितना सुनो, this is so different from the advisory. You to hit the ground running or whatever. But when you are actually building up things, it perhaps takes time to figure out, and you have to step back and give yourself time to actually go in with the full vigor rather than just jumping in.
नहीं, मेरा कुछ काम ही नहीं था ना, तो इसलिए फिर, लेकिन मैं क्या करता था ना, जिसको बोलते हैं ना थोड़ा कीड़ा करना,
हाँ.
कि कुछ काम है नहीं, ठीक है, तो देन आई वुड every function which was there, no, I would get data, and then I would just study the data, or I look at what we're doing, and then you would find पता नहीं faults or ways to improve it, and then I would go and pester those people, and obviously a lot of them were not so keen, so then I would just chat with Mithun. That actually was also useful because at that time I think Caratlane was missing one important function. We were not using data a lot and analytics a lot, and we didn't have like an analytics function. तो वहाँ से मिथुन को भी थोड़ा लगा कि यार ये हम लोग ये सब तो देख ही नहीं रहे हैं. तो देन ही सेड ओके, सो हायर सम पीपल. सो देन वी गॉट अ कपल ऑफ वेरी यंग एंथू data people, I used to call them. Then we started looking at stuff, and then some changes started happening, and suddenly Mithun was a full believer, and the rest of the organization that we can make some changes based on that. So I think wo bhi hai na, agar if I had gone and gotten into a function again, possibly you would have not spent time doing that.
Exactly. And that is why you have, I think as a generalist, and ultimately we become a generalist when we become a CEO, you have to be able to sit back and look at the larger picture before just jumping right in. That is the point I'm trying to. What is the one big mistakes or a few mistakes that you people did that you will caution everyone against now, all the startups?
No, but which stage of Caratlane? This is the first stage when I left, that 2010-11 tak. Then there's another stage till 2015-16.
So from the day you raised funds, from the time you came back,
तो जैसे I'll tell you, जैसे 2011 तक हम लोग जैसे थे ना, जब पैसा नहीं था तो बहुत चीज़ें अलग तरह से हो रही थी, राइट. Then we raised money, so we, I think we made all the mistakes which are all the experiments which people do. Okay. We also hired a lot of senior people उस समय, a lot of them, and many of them left also. So I think एक तो चीज़ मैंने देखा है ना कि जब पैसा आ जाता है ना, मतलब आपका decision of what to do and what not to do, which is important for the business, should not change too much because of money.
yes,
Just because you have money, you should not start thinking of new ways of spending that money. And I think while some of the things which we did, we had to do because that was the only way to learn. Like you had to open a store and learn कि store कैसे खोलना चाहिए. You had to hire people and figure out कैसे लोग चाहिए. You had to run a lot of other types of all kinds of advertising, including TV, to understand what works, what doesn't work. But I think जैसे we, if we had half that amount of money, then we would have not spent it on a lot of things which I think were not so useful.
let's talk about senior leaders that you hired. So if you remember, and this is again after you came back to Caratlane, there would be many roles which were superfluous, which were there because it fits in the typical organization narrative, या किसी को लगा कि अच्छा बंदा है, whatever. So what are the kind of roles you think a startup should have hired at that time when they've just raised their funds and those?
नहीं,
that
actually
they
I'll tell you the 2011-12 period में I think we थोड़ा सा were having more people in the leadership team.
अच्छा, interesting.
मतलब in the sense कि क्या होता है ना, you look at a standard template. Again, if you think about it, कि company in 2011 also, the number of examples कि at that size of business आपके कैसा आपको org बनाना चाहिए was not very well known. So what you do is that you
Borrow
borrow
it
from
from
the
the standard
example of a
company.
larger company.
Yes.
So you overhire because you think ये सारे functions के लिए specialist चाहिए. But what we did in 2016-17 when we built the team, I think that was closer to what we needed. And I think by that time we had become more objective
Okay.
and in the way we looked at things. We had started to realize ki what capabilities are needed in the organization. Although even then I think we थोड़ा सा क्या है ना कि there are uh, the growth mindset, right? When you say whatever is needed to grow the organization, right? And one of the things which we tend to do when you are in that stage is say कि ये problem है या ये opportunity है, let's get one person who will work only on this problem. I think we have been guilty of that in Caratlane, even in
Okay.
the later stages. And you keep adding people. What happens is that till the time growth is great, that is great. But what after a while you realize that you have a little, a few more people than what you would ideally want.
Exactly. Yeah.
And sometimes when the growth slows down, then the people cost becomes very high. We had one other challenge because the technology which we needed for Carrot Lane, and because we were a digital native organization, and again there were no examples of what to build. We had to literally discover कि हमारे business में हमारे customer के लिए क्या बनाना है. And many of the off the shelf solutions were not built for jewelry. Jewelry has many unique use cases which are not there in some of the standard software. So we have to build our whole tech stack, which means the understanding of what is needed. I just feel that even in some of the other functions ki we thoda sa we overhired. So because while there was this great growth, 50% CAGR and all, उस समय सब कुछ अच्छा था. But later I realize and now I think about it in hindsight कि we थोड़ा सा overdid the hiring part, people
Okay.
cost, because we were very growth driven, right? So you feel कि
But tell me, is
if
there
I had
any?
to do it all over again, I think we could have managed with 20% lower people cost.
But is there any easy way to do it? I don't think there is. People will end up hiring
So
more.
that's what no people will do it, and there is this tendency to say, कि because जैसे sometimes people are guilty of the loss aversion, right? कि आपको loss समझ में आता है, you don't understand upside. Some people like us who are a little more delusional that ways, वो अपसाइड को हमेशा ओवर वैल्यू भी कभी कभी आप कर सकते हैं, विच इज़ नॉट नॉर्मल टेंडेंसी ऑफ ह्यूमन बींग्स, बट आई थिंक वी थोड़ा सा टेंडेड टू डू दैट कि अगर ये प्रॉब्लम है इसको भी सॉल्व कर लेंगे तो सम इंक्रीमेंटल वैल्यू विल कम आउट ऑफ इट. बट आई थिंक द मार्जिनल रिटर्न्स आर ऑलवेज नॉट ग्रेट. So I think, and that's something which I'm now trying to be very, very mindful of. Like it's one big learning for me that while you know uh, obviously having expertise on many things is useful, but I just feel कि थोड़ा constraints में operate करना better होता. And in fact I just read this recent book called Thinking in a Box, which is about constraints by
Okay.
David Epstein, who's like
Okay.
one of my favorite authors. So this whole book is about constraints, where there's a very great comparison between a company called General Magic,
Okay.
which was a company which had insane funding, which was going to create like the Apple phone much before the Apple phone,
Okay.
and all the big companies of the world and all the big funds were invested in that. And वो लोग क्योंकि ना they kept adding people, they kept adding features, and कभी phone बना ही नहीं, and it was a disaster. Versus Pixar, which was done very differently, worked with all the constraints. Their competitors were buying supercomputers to create animated films. They did the calculation कि जितना super computing power चाहिए at that time was not financially viable. So they waited till the technology reached a stage where it was right for their business, and they are such a phenomenally successful organization.
Yes.
I think we were guilty of thoda sa general magic tendencies, although we had more Pixar tendencies only. But I think now having learned from this and read about it in other places, कि I would we are anyways trying to do it differently now.
Huh. So, and that is what is. I also want to highlight this point before we move on. With Carrot Lane, actually, one of the catalysts of growth was changing the office from Chennai to Mumbai. Because
Yeah.
if you had stuck to Chennai, then even you would not have joined. And in fact, a lot of the,
A lot of people, because it was hard to find talent in Chennai for
as
all
we
the
know, we
functions.
were hiring for your tech team
Yeah,
there in
yeah. I
Chennai.
think
And
one of the big problems you solved for us and your team was to get all the tech people in Chennai, because that used to be a big problem for us.
I know. Prashant still remembers those
Yeah,
days.
yeah.
Yes.
Because even Chennai people wanted to go to Bangalore, so
Yeah.
getting people in Chennai was such a problem.
Exactly. So that is something which is there. Okay. So let's move on. Now, there are two, three things that we keep facing in the hiring market even today. One of the biggest problems is hiring by proxy. I think you are also quite.
Uh,
No one wants to actually go
Actually, proxy चाहिए.
Huh.
It is which proxies you have to use.
Okay.
That is the game changer.
Huh. So which proxies? Let's
See,
hear
आप
about that.
ऐसे सोचो कि there are obviously the safest and proxies, right? Which means suppose if you can hire people from the best educational institutes and the best experience for a role, right? ये ideal situation है. And I'm not even getting into their attitude and the other softer parts because typically ये सब चीज़ की बात लोग 2015-16 में एटलीस्ट नहीं करते थे इतना culture and ये सब, right? This came at least in the Indian thing.
Yes.
So now imagine जैसे कि ना there is only a limited number of such people available, right? कि ऐसे लोग को आप फैक्ट्री में तो बना नहीं सकते हो,
Yeah.
right? And every company wants that. So there is a clear demand supply gap first, right? Which means that not only will you have to pay a super premium to get those people, okay? You might also still not get them क्योंकि somebody might outbid you, right? एंड एक और चीज़ आपसे ना कि ऐसे लोग जिन लोगों को मालूम है कि हमारा बहुत डिमांड है, दे ऑलवेज कीप यू ऑन द टेंटर हुक्स कि हम कभी भी छोड़ सकते हैं, कभी भी जा सकते हैं, आई नीड टू बी
Yes.
ट्रीटेड स्पेशली, ऑल ऑफ दोज थिंग्स.
Yes, in fact, this is one of the things which I've noticed. They don't commit fully because they are always having
They
five
have so
other
many
options.
options, right? And they often also feel कि जैसे, and this I experience myself, कि they also feel ना कि you are like the stepping stone to the next bigger thing which will be
Exactly.
there, right?
When you need is someone who's going to make it the next big thing, they are looking at you as a stepping stone, which is
So that is what I realized कि एक तो वह है कि ये डिमांड सप्लाई जो मिसमैच है उसके कारण यू आर ऑलवेज गोइंग टू बी फेसिंग मल्टीपल टाइप्स ऑफ प्रॉब्लम. एक तो यू विल ओवर पे, देन यू हैव टू ट्रीट देम विद किड ग्लव्स, दे विल वांट टू डू स्टफ विच माइट नॉट बी बेस्ट फॉर योर बिजनेस. फिर एक कंपनी में भी एक कास्ट सिस्टम बन जाता है बहुत ज़्यादा कि ये लोग तो बहुत आपके सुपर स्टार्स हैं, राइट? Which is what used to happen in a lot of companies which we have heard about कि people get treated like ये तो talented लोग हैं, right? And that एक तो it kills culture, you are not focusing on the right problems, you are overpaying, so all kinds of problems happen and you are essentially आपको वो करने वो that approach just breaks everything, right? So you have to then say कि you need a better approach, okay? And actually a lot of these realizations came much later.
okay.
The first realization was at the very core thing कि ये तो I would say these are second order impacts कि culture खराब होगा and they would leave and attrition and buying and all of that. The first fundamental assumption, the first order impact itself is saying कि these people are better for your role. That itself I realized was not true.
Yeah.
So, some of the initial hires I did with the assumption that if I'm able to get pedigreed people, so called, okay. And this is funny, right? Because some of the opportunities we have got also came because of that so called pedigree,
Yeah.
okay. Uh, and then I realized that it didn't work out. So, because when you are starting to hire more and become a manager of managers and all, तो ये सब चीज़ें तो I think the good thing which happened is कि sometimes when some people don't work out, you just assume कि ठीक है chance की बात है and you move on. I was very very shaken by that, okay. And उस समय हमको लगा ना कि clearly this is not going to work. And पता नहीं, I think I don't know whether I had the foresight or whatever, but I really thought कि I should focus on this problem कि how to hire better because the popular approach doesn't seem to be working well. So I think I'm lucky कि अगर ऐसा आपको थोड़ा एक दो झटका मिल गया शुरू में, क्योंकि अगर झटका नहीं मिलता then you would have bought into that approach. And then I started to first think कि how do I hire better. And then when I as to go more deeper into it, and because I had gone through this whole learning product management and learning marketing earlier, पढ़ के पूछ के करके, तो वो एक और अच्छी चीज़ थी. हम लोग जैसे लोग जो लोग कॉलेज में पढ़ाई नहीं करते उनको ऐसे भी बाद में ज़्यादा पढ़ना पड़ता है. तो फिर देन आई स्टार्टेड टू रीड एंड लर्न अबाउट पीपल एंड started with hiring first, and then it moved into team building and culture and performance and alignment and all of these things. As you go deeper, right, you discover other problem statements.
Yeah.
So I realized ना कि दूसरा proxy आपको खोजना ज़रूरी है.
Okay.
And then you also realize ना कि proxy for two reasons. One is that you make the demand supply work in your favor, and also those proxies are also more effective. And that is where, understanding attitude, and again, I read this book recently called The Founder's Mentality,
The
right?
founder mentality.
And again I had the same Paul Graham वाला feeling कि हम लोग भी वैसा ही सोच रहे थे कि we should get people who are very customer obsessed, because from the beginning that thing was there. So we said कि अगर ये चीज़ से इतना फ़ायदा होता, let's get people like this, or at least we should encourage and give more opportunities for people who displayed that, right? Or people who really had very high level of ownership, कि वो लोग ये नहीं कि कुछ प्रॉब्लम देख रहे हैं तो मेरा काम नहीं है तो इसलिए नहीं करेंगे. दे विल नॉट ब्रिंग इट टू यू, दे विल नॉट गो डीपर ऑन इनटू इट विदाउट if somebody didn't ask them to do that. And who will be very very मतलब literally they will work like an owner, right? कि अगर कुछ unnecessarily cost नहीं, कोई भी चीज़ मतलब गलत दिख रहा है तो you will do something about it, मतलब you will be restless if nothing is happening about it. So ये दिखने लगा ना कि ये सारा स्किल का या ये सारे चीज़ों का बहुत फ़ायदा होता है, बहुत वैल्यू है इससे, and इससे बहुत वैल्यू अनलॉक हो रहा है कंपनी में. सो एंड देन यू ऑल्सो रियलाइज़ कि ये बहुत पढ़े लिखे लोग या बहुत अच्छी कंपनी से आने वाले लोग में बाई डिफ़ॉल्ट ज़रूरी नहीं कि ये हो. एंड ऑल्सो पीपल हु डोंट हैव दोज डिग्रीज एंड एक्सपीरियंस में बहुत लोगों में ये मिल जाता था. सो देन इट केम टू दिस थिंग कि यू ऑल्सो हैव टू डिसाइड कि इफ़ आई हैव टू मेक अ चॉइस बिटवीन द टू, which one should I do? So again, from a data point of view also, you realize कि this option of going for this attitude-based hiring, attitude includes customer obsession, by the way. And customer obsession also is something which a lot of these people didn't have. So then you realize कि demand supply तो changes dramatically, क्योंकि आप एक proxy use कर रहे हो जिसको बाकी लोग use ही नहीं कर रहे हैं. And that is the time around which I read Moneyball. And तब तो हमको लगा कि भाई ये तो एकदम कोई आदमी इसको पूरी तरह से करके, एंड ऑब्वियसली माइकल लुइस आर्टिकुलेटेड इन अ वे विच वी विल नेवर बी एबल टू, बट बात वही थी, राइट?
दिमाग में घुस गई.
दिमाग में एकदम वो फिट हो गया कि अगर ये स्पोर्ट्स में ये चीज़ करके इन लोग कर रहे हैं तो यही चीज़ हम लोग को इस बिजनेस में भी करना है. एंड देन यू सेट कि नॉट ओनली फ्रॉम अ डिमांड सप्लाई, विच मीन्स योर हायरिंग प्रॉब्लम इज गॉन, क्योंकि आप जिसको हायर करना चाह रहे हो उसके पीछे लोग भाग ही नहीं रहे हैं, विच वॉज हैपनिंग इन मनी बॉल ऑल्सो. And then the impact also, we said कि अगर हमारा organization strength is the customer obsession which leads to great customer experience, which leads to better problems being found and solved for, which leads to better digital journeys and all of those things, then that ingredient is possibly more important than all the, so these people might not have the best communication skills or complex problem solving, but the other things they were bringing was great. And that after that, again borrowing from sports, I realized the power of complementing each other, which means कि हर एक आदमी में हर एक चीज़ नहीं चाहिए. तो जैसे अगर आपकी प्रोडक्ट या मार्केटिंग टीम्स ही है, उसमें कुछ लोग हैं हु आर से वेरी वेरी गुड एट स्ट्रेटेजिक थिंकिंग, very very good complex problem solvers, and some of the other people bring in the customer experience or customer obsession, or which will help. So one set of people will find great problems and the other set will solve those great problems, so it can work. Every individual level पे, मतलब जिसको बोलते हैं ना लोकल लेवल पे, आपको सारे स्किल सेट एक आदमी में नहीं चाहिए. तो दिस complementarity, this attitude, and what is the core thing which you would want in everybody, that थोड़ा सा founders mentality, all of those things के basis पे then we clearly figured कि proxy change करना चाहिए. And उसके अलावा एक और चीज़ हमको ये लगा ना कि ये लोग जो है ना, इनका जो the way you think about money also has to be different. जैसे one person will keep thinking short term money, इस साल का इंक्रीमेंट, इस साल का इंसेंटिव, एंड आप कभी उससे जीत नहीं सकते हो, उसका पेट ही नहीं भरेगा कभी. एंड देन देयर आर अदर पीपल हु विल से कि बॉस यहाँ पे मेरे को आप वो अपॉर्चुनिटी दे सकते हो जिससे मेरी लाइफ चेंज हो जाएगी, विच इज़ नॉट कि इंक्रीमेंट, विच इज़ कि आई विल गेट ऑन टू अ डिफरेंट ट्रैक ओनली. I will get a chance which I will never get. So that person has so much more loyalty for him, and that value जो आप उसको chance दे रहे हो means so much more to them, and it's a win-win for you also, because those people will never leave you and they will give you a real blood and sweat and tears and everything.
Exactly, which is very much like an investor's viewpoint of the terminal value. कि the opportunity that you have got, it is so large that ultimately if you can climb up that opportunity's hill, you are going to make a ton lot more money rather than just climbing small hills and making some amount of money every quarter or year or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
actually, the builders will want to go there where the terminal value is most versus, making quick bucks. In fact, I have a big chart framed and pasted in my office now because I keep training these freshers and which says which hill do you want to climb. Because very honestly, in our industry, also becoming a recruiter is a very small hill to climb. You can become a very good recruiter in 3-4 months. After that, of course, you have to build your network, relationships, contextual knowledge, etc., etc. But that is it. But ultimately, you want to climb a hill where you can keep climbing and becoming better at what you do. And you actually if you're going higher, then you're also building a very wide, large base. That is what you want. But the question that how do you screen for that proxy? See, as a recruiter, for me, it is easy to hire for IIT IIM because I can just do a search and do a filter
उसको
and
एक सर्टिफिकेट है ना. सी वो क्या होता
exactly.
है कि आपको एक चीज़ की एक सर्टिफिकेट मिली हुई है, तो वो आसान है हायर करना. एंड एक और चीज़ क्या होता है ना, सी आप ऐसे देखो कि अप्रोच ए है और अप्रोच बी है, एंड दोनों का प्रोबेबिलिटी सेम होगा फॉर सक्सेस, राइट. बट क्योंकि अप्रोच ए इज़ लाइक द यूनिवर्सल वे ऑफ डूइंग थिंग्स, वहाँ पे सक्सेस में तो आपको सक्सेस मिलेगा ही, फेलियर में आपको कोई कुछ गाली नहीं देगा, राइट. बिकॉज
Exactly, उससे वही
क्लासिकल
चलता
कि
एकदम. हाँ.
नोबडी गेट्स फायर्ड फॉर हायरिंग IBM.
Exactly.
दूसरे चीज़ में वही होगा कि वहाँ पे फेलियर होगा तो होगा कि तुम बेवकूफ़ हो इसीलिए, और वहाँ पे सक्सेस भी होगा तो लोग बोलेंगे यू गॉट लकी, राइट. I think when you look at enough examples, I think that is what gives you the confidence that let's go for option two.
So how do you go for that option to
हाँ हाँ, I'm
process?
coming to that. And see, उसके लिए ना, I think what is the very important no is to learn from other areas.
Okay.
And again, I think Moneyball and some of the other things in sports especially, where you start realizing कि what actually makes, एक तो again Moneyball में वो complementary skills, right? They say कि doing it by committee वाला examples है, so you get that, right? Then you also get the fact कि data, let's see कि वो what do they bring to the table, okay? And then you also start understanding कि एक आदमी क्या करता है, that founders mentality का जो भी whichever way we were thinking of it in our head. So you at least first point is ना कि आपको ये समझ में आने लगता है ना कि क्या मेरे को नहीं चाहिए और क्या चाहिए. Then the second point is obviously to figure out how do I hire for it. How do I find people who are
Yes.
say better at customer obsession, curiosity, वगैरह वगैरह वगैरह. So I think this was a very iterative process and borrowing from other industries. क्योंकि अपनी इंडस्ट्री में उस समय इतने एग्जाम्पल्स नहीं थे which could tell you how to do it, right? But you borrow from other areas, right? I also एक जैसे जैसे there is this thing in sports called chip on your shoulder. If you have been slighted in your life, if you have always been put down in your life, if you have not gotten the opportunities, then people have this real fire in their belly. तो ये चीज़ आप किसी और जगह से सीखते हो कि अच्छा ये है, तो देन यू थिंक कि हमारे इंडस्ट्री में फिर फायर इन द बेली का क्या एग्जांपल है. एंड एक और चीज़ तो ऑनेस्टली सी माय ओन पर्सनल लाइफ एग्जांपल, राइट, कि आई वाज विलिंग टू गो टू दिस एक्सटेंट टू गेट इनटू कंज्यूमर इंटरनेट, सो यू आल्सो अंडरस्टैंड दैट, राइट. सो आई थिंक द पर्सनल एक्सपीरियंस ऑल्सो हेल्प्स. एंड देन यू ऑल्सो थिंक ना कि अच्छा बट वॉट आर द गुड क्वालिटीज विच आई हैड विच समबडी बेट ऑन, राइट. सो देन यू से ओके यही क्वालिटीज़ के लिए हाउ डू आई चेक फॉर दैट. बट वहाँ पे बहुत ऑनेस्टली बहुत ट्रायल एंड ये करके देखना पड़ा. जैसे आई रियलाइज बिकॉज अगेन आई सॉ डेटा. इसमें भी क्या होता था ना कि आफ्टर अ फ्यू एग्जाम्पल्स यू कैन स्टार्ट सीइंग सम पैटर्न्स. जैसे पीपल हु केम फ्रॉम स्मॉलर टाउन्स फॉर एग्जाम्पल, यू कुड सी कि उनमें कितना थोड़ा फायर ज़्यादा था बिकॉज दे ऑल्सो मतलब इकोनॉमिकली दे वॉन्टेड टू मेकिंग मनी वॉज ऑल्सो मोर इम्पॉर्टेंट
Very
फॉर देम,
important for them. Yes.
राइट. देन यू सॉ कि कौन आदमी ना अपना जो उसको काम मिल रहा है उसके अलावा अपने से एफर्ट डाल रहा है ऑन इम्प्रूविंग सर्टन थिंग्स, यू आर नोइंग मोर, विच गोज टू शो कि इतना उसमें ड्राइव है, राइट. एंड ड्राइव आपको चेक करना, राइट, कि किस में ड्राइव है. एंड बाय द वे डैनियल पिंक रोट दिस बुक कॉल्ड ड्राइव विच वॉज ऑल्सो यूजफुल वे टू अंडरस्टैंड दैट. सो यू स्टार्टेड लुकिंग कि किस में ड्राइव है, राइट. कौन से लोग जेन्युइनली टीम वर्क का एग्जाम्पल्स है, राइट. एंड देन आई लर्न अनदर वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट ट्रिक, राइट, कि हाउ टू इंटरव्यू. एंड ठीक है, नाउ आई कैन से दिस ओवर हियर कि what you have to do in an interview, that you don't have to ask any direct questions. You only have to ask indirect questions. एंड यू हैव टू, जिसको बोलते हैं ना, यू हैव टू कैमोफ्लैज इट इन अ वे कि उसको लगे कि आप कुछ और पूछ रहे हो. So, like an example is कि you ask them about their greatest, say, achievements and failures in school. तो वो तो अपना उसको बताना है कि हम मैंने ये किया वो किया बताएगा. बट एक्चुअली आप ये पूछना जानना चाह रहे हो कि उसमें कितने एग्जाम्पल्स हैं विच इन्वॉल्व टीम एंड कितने हैं विच इन्वॉल्व इंडिविजुअल अचीवमेंट्स, राइट? सो देन यू कलेक्ट वन डेटा पॉइंट. So while you are in the interview, you have now got one hypothesis कि at least this person showed one example of team versus individual. अब आप उसको भूल जाओ वहाँ पे. Don't ask a follow up question then. फिर आप आधे घंटे के बाद ask another question to again validate, and then you say कि ठीक है, now if I have got 3 different questions I've asked indirectly, and if all of them are kind of pointing, then ठीक है, it looks like it might be a good thing. And there's this book written by this guy who was also a management consultant who headed HR at Google.
Okay.
क्या उसका नाम है? I don't remember right now.
हाँ.
That's a great book. Again, because again, that book actually gave me another very good insight कि the people function, no, or the HR function should be run like product management or marketing only. In the way you look at funnels, the way you look at data, the way you look at referral, word of mouth, brand, all of that. And in fact, I wrote it down also because I wanted to tell everybody कि ना HR को HR जैसा मत देखो. There is no and the fact that a person who came outside of HR, who came with a management consultant's approach of solving problems, etc., did so well at HR that he was head of that at a company like Google. Again, went to show you कि a lot of good principles could be applied to what, क्योंकि ना हमेशा ऐसा एटलीस्ट माइंडसेट होता है ना कि जिसको कोई और फंक्शन में नहीं होता वो HR में जाता है, राइट? I remember, in fact, at my XLRI interview, they asked me, why didn't you select, why did you take BMD and not PMIR? So, like a smartass had given this answer also, कि HR people don't make CEOs types.
I remember saying this in a career launcher seminar in Banaras. They were opening their center in Banaras and they had launched. I was from IIM Lucknow in Allahabad, so they had called me for this thing. I just said, choose anything but not HR. Why? HR people never make CEOs. And they were like कि साले 70% लोग जो है ना वो ultimately MBA HR करके ही करने वाले हैं. Don't do this.
हाँ, तो anyways, तो ये फिर ना धीरे धीरे ये बहुत हिट एंड ट्रायल एंड बहुत आइट्रेशन, एंड इसके लिए ना आई थिंक आई read about a lot of people and a lot about team building. And just actually, the best place I have found, even more than say football in Europe, se zyada sports in America, they were far more. And if you, again, Moneyball is an example of that, right? That the way they had started to use data to figure out how teams complement each other better and how people work well with each other. There is this concept of a glue guy, people who do the dirty work,
Yes.
so that the superstar can perform.
Yes.
All of those concepts. So एक तरह से ना, if you open your mind to the idea कि मेरे को इस एरिया में जो प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व करना है उसके आंसर्स बाहर बहुत अच्छे अच्छे मिल सकते हैं, मेरे को आंसर यहीं पे नहीं खोजना है, then the world just changes. And then you know कि okay, let me just go and look at all the great empire builders. Let me look at the people who have built great sports teams. And the funny thing is कि जैसे there is this team in the NBA called the San Antonio Spurs.
हाँ.
And they used to, so I used to like this team called the Los Angeles Lakers, and the San Antonio Spurs were the biggest rival. So obviously I hated them. But as I started to become a student of how teams were built and people, I started to become a big fan of the Spurs.
Okay.
That is another change which happened in me. I went from being from hating them to loving them to this day. And they are like another, such a amazing example of.
So what is it? Which is the takeaway that made you their fan?
So they had such. So typically in America, teams which come from small markets are not able to be very successful, and create like a dynasty.
Yeah.
They did that, and they did it for such a long period. And their coach, right, and earlier the general manager also called Greg Popovich. But you read his stories of how he does it, and he also borrows from various fields. So he was actually in the Naval Academy, okay? And he's a great student of history. So he will always use wars and battles ka example, and he will figure out. And one of the big things with him is his coaching tree. So America में एक concept होता है coaching tree कि coaches who worked under the main coach and how successful they become. Today, almost half the successful coaches and general managers in NBA come from the San Antonio Spurs. एंड वो लोग ना ऐसा वो लोग फंडामेंटल तरह का प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व करते थे ना कि जैसे द होल वर्ल्ड वुड लुक फॉर स्ट्रॉन्ग एथलेटिक बिग फास्ट प्लेयर्स फ्रॉम अमेरिका, राइट?
Yeah.
These people would go and hire intellectual and more cerebral players from Europe. So they were hiring, getting players from Europe before anybody had thought about it. So they had done the same thing, right? They went and looked at a different talent pool than what everybody else was doing. And then they would play everything. तो जैसे हम लोग बोले ना कि we focus कि everybody should be customer obsessed. तो the Spurs का ये था ना कि they wanted everybody who was an, like an intelligent player who understood passing and team approach first. वो उनके लिए non-negotiable था. They were the first team which said कि it's okay if we don't get somebody who's a great shooter. They made sure that the best shooting coach in the world was in their team. So they were able to improve everybody's shooting by say 10 percentage points or whatever.
Which is a very big compounder.
Which is a big compounder. So you are not paying extra for shooting, which is a very desired skill, but you are building it in-house. So वो उससे आप ये भी सोचते हो ना कि कौन सा स्किल है जो डेवलप हो सकता है एंड कौन सा चीज़ इनहेरेंट है. एंड उससे आई रियलाइज कि एटीट्यूड्स या ओनरशिप ये आपके माँ बाप आपको सिखाते हैं. हम लोग आपको ट्रेनिंग करके नहीं सिखा सकते हैं. So then I realized that that is a natural thing which we cannot teach. But can I teach somebody to become better at analytics so all the functional skills आप सिखा सकते हो.
Yes.
So then you also realize कि what should I pay for and what should I develop, right? So then you realize कि जैसे they realize, right, कि somebody fundamentally team first, intelligence is something which you could not teach so much, which people came with, but shooting you could teach. तो हम लोग भी ये सोचा यार कि PRD लिखना कितना मुश्किल काम है. PRD लिखना सिखा देंगे या एक आदमी को भी बहुत चैंपियन है वो लिख देगा. लेकिन अगर वो कस्टमर ऑब्सेस्ड नहीं है ना तो हम लोग जैसा आई यूज्ड टू सी दिस, राइट, कि आई यूज्ड टू फोर्स पीपल टू गो टू द स्टोर की स्पेंड टाइम विद कस्टमर्स. एक तो लोग जाना नहीं चाहते हैं, बहुत आप धक्का लगा के बहुत एकदम अथॉरिटेरियन
लड़ाई करके
नहीं कस्टमर से लड़ेंगे नहीं. ऐसा बेवकूफ़ वाला कस्टमर इनसाइड लेके आएंगे ना जिसको बोलते हैं ना कि एकदम बेरोजगारी वाला काम करके कि कस्टमर, हाँ क्या बात की है कस्टमर से, कस्टमर बोला ना कि आर प्राइजेस आर हाई. अरे भाई इसके लिए तुमको जाने की क्या ज़रूरत है, वो तो बोलेगा ही आदमी. या कस्टमर बोल रहा है कि कैरेटलेन शुड सेल 22 कैरेट ज्वेलरी. बोले ये तुमको एक इंसाइट मिला, बस तुम एक दिन पूरा स्टोर में रहे, यही एक इंसाइट. तो इसका मतलब उसको करना ही नहीं है. क्योंकि क्या है ना कि आपको सी good insights come when you have curiosity and you ask good questions and you pick up on small cues which the customers gives and then you build on that. ये आदमी कर ही नहीं रहा है, वो बस ऐसा obvious question. And good insights come when you are not interviewing, rather having a conversation. कि बात में वो they will drop good things and then you can build up on those points. अगर आप जाके उससे ऐसे yes no वाला question पूछोगे, are you happy, आपको क्या अच्छा नहीं लग रहा है, तो वो ऐसा ही जवाब देगा. तो you figured कि यार ये लोग कर ही नहीं रहे. And then you would see some other people who are not even in customer facing functions, and when they went and they would come and give you much better insights. So I think I've just rambled around about everything. But this is what, so it started from the first few mistakes in hiring, and then it led to the demand supply understanding, then understanding the second order impacts, and then eventually the hiring wala part. May obviously again we made mistakes, but then you realize कि जैसे one thing which I used to always do कि task तो करवाना ही है. And task इसलिए नहीं था कि task चाहिए, उससे भी ये समझना था ना कि कितना interested है, how badly do they want to be here, or we are one of the 10 options for them. So you have to first know कि what are you want to check. I want to check कि आपको ये job में कितना interest है, या आप मतलब we are one of the 10 options which you have. If we are one of the 10 options which you have, then it is very hard for me to be number one in the 10 options. But if you are like आपको दो ही कंपनी में इंटरेस्ट and we are one of the 10, then I think we can, there's a chance कि you will, and we also think कि what is the opportunity that I can give you which nobody else can give you, and how badly do you want that opportunity. I think once you get, these are also things which are important to understand. If you have like मेरे पास 50 options हैं तो आप क्यों ही आओगे मेरे पास भाई, क्योंकि I can't pay you more than anybody else.
Yes, absolutely. So now I also want to get some insights from other sectors. Like you mentioned a very interesting thing, empire builders. So sports तो बहुत है. In fact, one more thing that I would want to mention from sports, all good sporting franchises, they have dedicated talent scouts. I think this is something which HR in India forgets. They only know campus hiring and they know interviews and drives.
Yeah.
But you have to actually scout for talent. 10x talent is a reality. In fact, 100x talent is a reality. And if you can have a pipeline where you are getting good people and you can then groom them inside your organization, you have a mode which no one can beat.
Again, I'll give you a Spurs example right now कि they in जैसे वहाँ पे एक NBA draft होता है इसमें all the talented players are taken through that and एक order में people go and pick the players. So they bet on this one guy, okay, and all the others thought कि this guy was not right, okay. And you can always find कि ये बंदे में ये shortcomings है. But these people had seen him from a very young age. Again, they had a talent scout who had been following this guy from high school के time से when he was playing. And they looked at, one of the decisions he made was कि, if you go to a team which is already very strong in college, तो वहाँ पे आपको कम chances मिलेंगे क्योंकि ऑलरेडी बहुत सारे लोग हैं तो आपको खुद हीरो बनने का चांस कम मिलेगा, राइट. People prefer to go to a team जहाँ पे they can showcase themselves well in college so that the teams will pick them when they go to professional. This guy actually went to a team which was already very strong and he helped them win a title at the college level. But his stats were not so great because of that. And imagine most of the other teams therefore didn't pick on him saying कि इसका stats are not so great. But these guys, saw the positive side of that कि he went to a team where you could win. They had seen his career from high school and they picked him. And उन लोग number 1 choice नहीं था उनका उस draft में, but they actually got the best player in their draft, although they were picking like some 3rd, 4th position पे. And so you keep doing a better job of finding talent because of that.
And which is another interesting corollary, I would say, that when you're hiring, and this is a problem that I've seen India again and again, it's more of a rejection thing rather than a selection thing. So you don't look for things.
And also कि I should not look bad.
हाँ,
एक तरह से मेरा ये भी है ना कि जो हायरिंग कर रहा है ना उसको वो अपना अप्रेजल के बारे में ऑलरेडी सोच रहा है कि उसको कैसे सारी गलतियों का अगर जस्टिफिकेशन है एंड जो अच्छा होगा उसका फायदा तो मिलेगा ये. हाँ.
Too many biases. But anyways, let's move on. Let's move on to the empire builders. It's very, very interesting. So,
See, if you think about all those people in history,
yes,
and history में भी आप देखो ना कि actually history में भी there are 2 types of examples, right? There are people who inherited the throne, right? In fact 3 I would say कि जैसे sometimes there is a seamless transition कि राजा मरा और उसका बेटा राजा बन गया, right? Then there are examples of the Mughals जिसमें कोई inheritance नहीं होता था, आपको अपने सब भाई लोग को मारना पड़ता था एंड तभी बनता था. तो एक तरह से ना सर्वाइवल ऑफ द फिटेस्ट का गेम वुड ऑलवेज हैपन इन द मुगल. सो हुएवर केम टू द थ्रोन हैड टू ओवरकम अ लॉट ऑफ ऑड्स एंड प्रूव. एक तरह से वो एक इट वॉज नॉट गिवन टू यू हैव टू विन वन वेरी हार्ड कॉम्पिटिशन with last man standing things, right? So while I'm not a fan of Aurangzeb, but if you look at Aurangzeb, he killed all his brothers and he therefore, passed a very difficult test to become the emperor of, the next in line for the Mughals. So that goes to show certain skills, right? And then the third type is the most interesting type, which is like the first generation entrepreneur. तो फर्स्ट जनरेशन एंटरप्रेन्योर का इक्विवेलेंट कौन है, राइट? मतलब चलो जैसे कि टाटा बिरला लोग हैं, वो लोग जो लोग इनहेरिट भी किए, दे आर नॉट अंडरमाइनिंग देम, दे आर ऑल्सो ग्रेट. बट द पर्सन हु स्टार्ट्स इट, राइट, लाइक धीरू भाई इज धीरू भाई, राइट? तो आपको ये देखना है ना कि हिस्ट्री में हु आर द धीरू भाईज ऑफ द वर्ल्ड, राइट? और द जेफ बेजोस ऑफ द वर्ल्ड, राइट, हु स्टार्टेड थिंग्स. So if you look at like somebody like Genghis Khan, right, and I've written about it, and enough people criticize me ki he was a barbarian and he was all of those things, and all the killing he did, nobody is justifying that. But you have to see that he came from a place where there was everybody was there were only small tribes on the steppes of Mongolia, and wahan se he starts and he unifies all the tribes, and then they rule the largest part of the world for the longest time. Yes. It can't be accidental, right? And you see कि and he was an uneducated person, by the way, पढ़ भी नहीं सकता था, and yet they were, and so you have to see कि what did he do, right? Such a large empire could not have continued for such a long time, and they didn't come with any natural advantages also, right? But they figured out their own way, right, of winning and continuing to keep those things, and the way they terrorized, the way they built their economy, the way he had an eye for talent. तो वहाँ पे ऐसा कोई हेरिडिटरी रूल नहीं था कि आपका बेटा ही बनेगा. उसका ये था कि irrespective of your religion and caste community, जो आदमी सबसे capable है उसको मिलेगा. तो सोचो, आप imagine करो, in the 11th 12th century he was being meritocratic and equal opportunity, right? And while he killed a lot of people, he would not kill the talented artisans of the other kingdoms or armies he would capture. In fact, he would keep them and he would in a way circulate them across his empire. So if he found good doctors somewhere, then they would be sent to other parts of the इतनी उसको समझ थी, right? So then you learn about these things from him. In fact, which is this very good book about culture written by one of the top, I can't remember names these days. This may one of the examples it talks about is Genghis Khan, ki how you can learn so much from him. And then you look at uh, I know this is an even more controversial name, but if you think about Hitler, ऐसे हम लोग जब एक सेकंड के लिए हिटलर को हम लोग छोड़ देते हैं, हम लोग किसी भी लीडर की बात करते हैं, तो व्हाट डू वी से कि कम्युनिकेशन हैज़ टू बी वन ऑफ द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग्स, राइट? So that they can inspire the whole organization and they can get them to have a common purpose, right? All of those things. And then if you think about it, and एक सेकंड के लिए आप हिटलर का जो होलोकॉस्ट और ये सब को छोड़ दो, इसमें तो कोई डाउट नहीं है कि इमेजिन ही केम फ्रॉम नथिंग, राइट? मतलब देयर वाज नो मिलिट्री बैकग्राउंड, ही वाज नॉट इवन लाइक द मोस्ट इम्पोजिंग कैरेक्टर, but just through his speeches and everything, he was able to not only unite, but let's get them to do these irrational crazy things, the whole country. Somewhere you have to see कि what are the communication lessons to be learned from Hitler. आप उससे मतलब नाज़ी extermination मत सीखो, but in fact if you look at the Indian imperialists also, if you look at the British Empire, I always think कि इतने कम लोग कैसे इतने सारे लोग को कंट्रोल किए. Somewhere there has to be a lot of discipline, some common theme which allowed them to do this, right? And the funny thing is कि I also think कि ऐसा नहीं है कि British Empire in India, when मतलब whether the East India Company or when finally the empire got involved directly, was not corrupt. Corruption was एकदम rampant, right? And yet they were not losing discipline. So you think about it कि most corrupt organizations में discipline goes for a toss, execution goes for a toss, and yet the British were able to maintain their discipline and excellent execution on the ground in spite of being corrupt, right? तो कुछ तो वो लोग सही कर रहे होंगे, right? And there are certain things जैसे the public school system and फिर उनका जो भी some of the other reputational things which people would worry about, so they would not cross certain lines. And then they figured कि corruption रोकने का तरीका is to pay them like crazy. So they made those changes. So there are so many examples which otherwise might not be, like you might not want to be like them, but you have to learn from some of those things, right?
So from Genghis, I got being meritocratic and picking up talented people and circulating them around the organization.
Yeah.
From Hitler, you are saying one should learn the power of purpose, the communication.
Yeah.
And from the British Empire, I think it is more of a culture thing. Even
Culture
now, the
again,
sense of justice, the sense of right and wrong that we think we have learned, imbibed from the British, we have not seen it anywhere else. Everywhere else, it is, okay to do what is happening, blink yourself and what.
आप सोचो पूरे दुनिया में वो लोग इतने साल तक they were able to do so well.
Yes.
Okay. Somewhere तो they had some, I think it is culture only, right? कि whatever you did, but the pride in the British Empire and
Yeah.
and we also know कि somewhere the British were also very good कि when the French were helping some of the Indians, right, with their artillery etc, तो वहाँ पे भी they were able to go and break them. मतलब आप ये सोचो ना कि they were able to use money to break up everybody, right? All the kings of India, जैसे the Marathas had they been united, all the houses, then they could have actually defeated the British, right?
Yes.
But I think कि the way they broke up the Marathas and they एक करके they picked them off, right? And they never let the Marathas and the Sikhs unite, for example. Or say Tipu Sultan and the Marathas unite is like a master class in how to manage. And सोचो कि the kings also had so much money, right? वो लोग ब्रिटिश लोग को नहीं तोड़ सकते थे, लेकिन ये लोग तो उनसे तो ये तो सीखने का चीज़ है ना कि हाउ डू यू stay united and execute with a clear plan, and they would be very disciplined in their plan. But I think, in fact, this is one of the rabbit holes for me, which I'm trying to understand more of. Ki what were the building blocks for the kind of culture the British created, and not just in India, all over the world. Well, I just finished reading The Great Game, ठीक है? And you think of all these British officers who were going into Central Asia, and in disguise, and sometimes disguised as Muslim holy men. And sometimes the local people would start asking them questions about religion and all, and still they would find ways, some jugaad to manage that. But it was almost like a suicide mission going on some of these
Yeah.
missions. But
Yes.
there were so many people, aisa, there was no shortage of people who were willing to. So what was driving them now? I still haven't got an answer, but it is one of the things which I'm trying to understand. Like my current rabbit hole list है वो कि
I think one of the things that British Empire did very well was to give a path to aristocracy, a path to
public schools.
richness, even to peasants. So if you'll see, serving the empire well in across the world outside the British islands. If you were doing that, then you could move from being the sixth son, seventh son of a farmer to a knighted lord in within 30-40 years.
Yeah.
And that is something which
You could, all the money you made in India, and you could go back and literally buy a parliament seat.
yes, exactly. So they could see that if they were serving the empire well and they were doing it, it was being
Risk
rewarded.
taking to था. Actually, if you read Sapiens also, he says one of the things which Europe benefited from, एक तो था कि यूरोप में इतनी लड़ाई हो रही थी कि आपका कंपटीशन इतना था कि you were sharper than say in Asia जहाँ पे कोई competition नहीं लड़ रहे थे वो लोग, right? And second, because they didn't have anything, right? They had to take chances and go and explore the rest of the world, because when you come from nothing, you have to go and take those chances, right? And I think हम लोग को उल्टा था कि we had so much riches in India and we had no competition, इसलिए we were very very comfortable.
That has always been our curse. We have
In
been
fact,
blessed with very
connected to
fertile
the British, the other example which I found is that if you read about the early days of piracy,
Okay.
so all the जैसे Her Majesty's और all the जो the official countries का जो ships होता था, right? They were very very bureaucratic and hierarchical, right? And they would have a lot of lower category seamen जिनको कोई rights कुछ नहीं होता था, right? And that was completely changed in piracy. So the introduction of democratic systems actually happened in pirate ships,
Yes.
where they would elect a leader,
Yes.
and they would make decisions together. And वहाँ पे ये नहीं कि the captain can eat food and बाकी लोग भूख से मर रहे हैं. It was very very equal, and in fact all decisions were made by people voting on some of those things.
Yes.
So the Blackbeard and ये जो भी the early pirates, they are the ones actually who introduced, and you think about it, like they were actually if you think of the Her Majesty's ships as the large corporate organizations, they were the first set of disruptive startups, right, in a way. And इसलिए I think उनका risk taking, क्योंकि they would get a share of the profit, right, एक तरह से wealth creation उनके लिए ज़्यादा हो रहा था. So
And in fact, this is again a leaner, meaner organization built up of people
with correct alignment,
built up of people who are hungry and who are aligned to the organization
and who will get incentivized correctly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think which is again something that is being missed. We keep seeing this question: ESOPs, not ESOPs. When do you give ESOPs? What has to happen is that there has to be a core group of people who are aligned with the founder or founders in the success of the
Who
organization.
think like founders. Yeah.
I think that balance is being missed. Acha, tell me, now you have moved on. Now you have taken up a totally new role where you're doing the best of both worlds. You are an operator as well as an investor. With the,
I'm like between that दोनों spaces में somewhere I'm suspended.
Yes. So, and I think now you also have the space to do those experiments with the hierarchy, with the organization structures, the kind of people that you're hiring that you did not have earlier. So why don't you tell us a bit about that?
So I'll tell you, जैसे एक तो something I mentioned earlier, कि I realized कि people cost was one thing which you have to be very mindful of. And then I also saw कि the way you hired, and जैसे ना, if you think of जैसे positive energy होती है एक organization में, where you're chasing the important problems, you're showing great ownership वगैरह वगैरह, and then there is negative energy. What is negative energy? कि मेरा फ़ायदा क्या चीज़ में हो रहा है, ये काम मैं क्यों करूँ, वो मेरे को हेल्प नहीं कर रहा है, right? Two people not agreeing on something, so the effort which has to go into aligning them. And there is obviously no way to quantify this, but so much energy एक तरह से is getting lost, right? And the asset of an organization is not just the money which it has, but the energy, right? कि जैसे if you break it down to the smallest level, कि one employee who comes, if you go to the smallest level, and वो अगर 8 घंटा काम करता है, ठीक है, and 12 घंटा सोचता है एटलीस्ट, कि जब काम के अलावा भी सोच रहा है, how much of the time is really focused on solving problems for the company versus solving their own growth problems, right?
Yes.
If you just go down to that level, if I can say get 95% of our employees, the key people in all the n minus 1 say n minus 2 levels also, to spend 95% of the time thinking about consumer problems and business problems versus a situation where that number is only 50% because they are worrying about their own challenges. I think अगर आप वो structurally and culturally solve कर दो तो अपने आप maximum problem solve हो जाएंगी. Because just think about it कि the total amount of energy which is being spent on solving business and consumer problems versus in these two situations is so much different, right? And actually, I think if you have enough smart people with complementary skills who are doing this each and every day, then most problems will be found also, because people are spending so much time finding
Yes.
good problems, and then they will also solve these problems also, right? Also, problems will get solved because जहाँ पे अच्छे diverse teams work together, most problems get solved, right? Well, I think there's enough examples in history, and the best example is Edison, actually, जहाँ पे if you get enough smart people to work together and as long as they collaborate, they will solve those problems. But जहाँ पे वो collaboration नहीं होगा, वहाँ पे easy problem भी नहीं solve होगा. So I think कि whatever, whether it is ESOPs, whether it is the KRAs, whether it is OKRs, whether it is the way you articulate the important problems and goals, how much time you spend on making sure that people actually attitude-wise are a good fit, whether people are there who actually collaborate or not, इस पे अगर आप शुरू में सारा एनर्जी लगा दो तो फिर बाद का बहुत सारा प्रॉब्लम्स ईजी हो जाता है, राइट? एंड जैसे क्या होता है कि लाइक वी स्पोक अबाउट शॉर्ट टर्म एंड लॉन्ग टर्म गोल्स, राइट? उसमें भी अगर है ना कि इफ़ पीपल आर वरीड अबाउट कि इस साल अप्रेजल क्या आएगा, ये सब, राइट? उस पर ही उनका फोकस है क्योंकि सारा पैसा उसी से बनने वाला है, देन ऑब्वियसली दे विल they will, it's very natural, right, out of psychological safety that you will focus on that. And but if you borrow from teams, right, if you say ki bhai, if we win this tournament, and what is the tournament, suppose we are investing in a company today and we say bhai, in 6 7 8 years whatever, we have to take this company to 5 times the revenue and say 10 times today's profit. And if you do that, then this is like a massive reward जो आप 10 साल भी नौकरी करके उसके सेविंग से नहीं बना सकते हो. एंड वी विल डू इट इन अ वेरी ट्रांसपेरेंट मैनर, in a very fair manner, okay, so that कि this is happening. Then एक तो ये है ना कि if one, you should only hire people or people in this situation who are excited by this opportunity. If they are not excited तो ऐसे भी उनको लेने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. So if you make a great plan like this and then you get people who are actually motivated by this, and then उनका structure and ये जो short term incentive और short term salary increase का लड़ाई आप हटा दो. One of the things I'm trying to do in one of these companies is कि आपका अगला 5 साल का जो अप्रेजल का क्वांटिटी है ना, जो इंक्रीमेंट की वो फिक्स्ड है. तो आप जितना भी, क्योंकि आपको आई वांट यू टू गो एंड गेट दैट बिगर प्राइज, वी विल स्टिल टॉक अबाउट योर परफॉर्मेंस, वी विल स्टिल टेल यू व्हाट यू आर नॉट डूइंग वेल, बट लेट्स डू इट इन द ऑब्जेक्टिव मैनर टू से कि वी हैव टू सॉल्व फॉर द बिजनेस एंड नॉट थिंकिंग कि ये अगर मैं बोल दूंगा तो मेरा अप्रेजल का अमाउंट फिक्स है, तुम अब उसके पीछे अपना जान मत लगाओ एंड वरी अबाउट द बिगर प्राइज. एंड इफ यू डोंट गेट दैट, देन ऑल ऑफ अस आर गोइंग टू फेल. So you also have to push each other. And this only happens when you get the right team in place from the beginning, which is excited by this also, and which is, where you have some evidence which gives you the confidence that they have. So a lot of these people are ex-Caratlaners also, where you know them so well, or people who come through some very strong reference, जहाँ पे you have the confidence कि we can take this kind of a bet on them, because you can't take this bet on 20 अननोन पीपल जिसके बारे में आप जानते नहीं हो, कि यू गिव देम ऑल ऑफ दिस एंड बाद में पता चला आधे लोग छोड़ के चले गए. बट एज लॉन्ग एज यू नो पीपल एंड यू ट्रस्ट देम और यू हैव अदर वेज ऑफ टेस्टिंग देम, एंड देन यू डू दिस एज एन एक्सपेरिमेंट कि कैन दिस काइंड ऑफ इंसेंटिवाइजेशन एंड अलाइनमेंट एंड दिस काइंड ऑफ रिवॉर्ड स्ट्रक्चर really create a much better outcome.
Which is I think that also means that organizations again and maybe firms like us also should invest a lot more in building the talent pipeline. So if someone like you is looking to hire those people that you can take a bet on, then someone like should be able be able to come and say, "Ki, okay, this is
Like
a
the
person."
Spurs, right? You
Yes.
tell me somebody who you have been monitoring since high school. Obviously,
Yes.
you can't do high school, but at least जो आप उसको 7-8 साल से जानते हो अगर हो,
Yes.
and you can give me enough data points to or evidence to support कि this person is exactly of the mindset that you're looking for, or if you just have your own filter कि these are people who have been verified for having founders mentality,
Yes, exactly. And
which
that
is
is
the
where we
same thing, right? कि through जो मैं reference बोल रहा हूँ,
वो वही
you
चीज़ है
can
ना.
become like that.
Yes, yes. No, it's a very important point, and I think if you are able to get that right, then it makes the life of someone like you who's investing in companies, because ultimately I think that is your biggest challenge, getting those right set of
People,
operators. In fact, I was sharing with someone that it is very difficult for someone like a fund or even someone like you to actually get someone new to head a business. Often, even investment decisions are made on the basis of the operator that you can hire for that
yeah. So
decision or
that
not.
is the typical private equity style, where I think you first get an operator, and then you not only identify the asset but make the plan with the operator.
Yes.
But we don't go work like that. Matlab we feel that if we get a good business, then we can either that might have an operator. We will have to add certain people to the leadership team, or sometimes even if you need an operator, whichever way it works. But हाँ सही team is तो I think उसके बिना it's a non-starter to take any chances.
So, as an investor, and I think we are moving towards the end of this discussion. So, as an investor, if you're putting in money in any company, whether it is a startup or whether it is, let's say, a mid-sized company that you look, what is the lens that you use? How do you assess their people capability, their leadership capability,
The
right?
founder.
Of the founder or the existing team? How important is that, and how do you judge that?
See, तो ये जो चीज़ मैंने बोला ना कि द फाउंडर्स मेंटालिटी वाला चीज़, if you sit in enough meetings, if you ask enough questions, you will start to notice कि कितना है कितना नहीं है. क्या वो लोग डेटा देखते हैं, कितना honestly they acknowledge what is working and what is not working well, whether they can hold each other accountable, whether they call out their own failures, right? And what, how are they responding to situations? Like how quickly they notice stuff and they react to it. The agility which comes in an organization comes when information moves quickly and people notice the information and then they act on it. And एक दूसरे को कराना, which means कि you don't have to just notice challenges which you are seeing in your part of the work, but in general, whichever thing is wrong for the company, and then how quickly you guys act on it.
Or if you've learned something, you can just put it across functions or across the organization.
So अगर ये चीज़ ना आप थोड़ा सा टाइम स्पेंड करोगे कंपनी में, आपको दिखने लगेगा.
Okay.
And the kind of excuses which people will give for when things are not happening. I think now this diagnostic, right, about the culture and the attitude of people in the leadership team of an organization, and ठीक है, there might be some other culture, I'm not saying that what I think is our way of defining the right culture and right attitudes and right mentality is the only way to create a successful business. There are other businesses, but we don't know how to do that. So it's not for us. At least what we are doing, we know this one way, so we look for that. If it is not happening, then we have to make some changes, certain additions, subtractions. And you have to be very decisive in that. I think that's very important. And I think, one lesson which I've also learned कि sometimes you will have a superstar जो functionally बहुत ही champion होगा, लेकिन अगर if they are not good at working with the rest of the organization and being aligned, it is actually sometimes we feel कि अरे यार ये तो superstar है तो we should keep them. That actually is something which you can't do. I think enough people both in organizations and in sports teams have learned that lesson, because you tend to feel right that this person is bringing so much value,
But then
the,
you are
but
totally dependent
the
upon.
toxicity they create is actually not worth it.
I remember working for a very renowned media organization in our early days in 2006-7, and our sole job was to hire the line producer for the news anchor. She is one of those old-time celebrated news anchors. There used to be only 5-6 channels: NDTV, Times Now, etc., etc., and a couple of Hindi channels. And this person, this anchor, while she was a rock star by every definition of this thing, she was a very toxic person. And they would lose a line producer every month or so. And at that time in India, there were maybe only 20, 25 line producers who could actually run a live news show online for 1 hour. So what happened is that the HR head of that television channel would come to us and they would give us 3 names. Okay, I've softened them up. Now chase them till one of them is ready to join. And I'm talking about 2007-8. The first person we closed was at 6-7 lakhs, which was perhaps the I am Lucknow salary for many of us at that time. By the time we closed the 7th one in 1 year, the salary had jumped from 6-7 lakhs to 13 lakhs. I still remember that.
Wow.
Yes. So this is what happens when you have a toxic superstar. The rest of the organization suffers. Ultimately, they had to let her go. That person was asked to move out because there was no one else willing to work in the organization. And right now, she is a struggling YouTuber. The business is maybe 100 times where it was. Right.
ये
So
होता है कल्ट ऑफ द सुपरस्टार जिसको बोलते हैं स्पोर्ट्स वर्ल्ड में.
तो एक तो ये चीज़ है. अच्छा, दूसरा एक और जो प्रॉब्लम सीनियर हायरिंग में हम लोग देखते हैं जिनका बॉस मैनेजमेंट बहुत अच्छा है. You always have these
they
people.
know how to manage upwards or not. हाँ.
नीचे से उनको कोई मतलब नहीं, बट ऊपर इतने अच्छे से मैनेज करता है, यू फील दैट अरे इसके बिना तो काम ही नहीं हो सकता. एंड
नहीं, एक्चुअली इनफैक्ट वन थिंग विच आई ऑल्सो लर्न नो, एंड ये भी एक्चुअली पुराने सिस्टम्स आई लर्न कि इफ़ यू थिंक अबाउट इट, द बिगर योर कंपनी बिकम्स, राइट, एंड द मोर लेयर्स विच गेट एडेड, your distance from the two most important constituents, right, which is your frontline people, whether in sales, supply chain, whatever, increases, and your distance from your consumer also increases. अब आपके पास सारा इन्फॉर्मेशन जो आ रहा है वो बहुत वाया 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 आ रहा है, तो उसमें कितना कलर ऐड हो चुका है, कितना वो है, यू डोंट नो, राइट.
एग्जैक्टली.
And many organizations which have not been able to, so एक तरह से see what is management, right? One of the things about management is to quickly notice risk and respond. अगर आप रिस्क जो अगर डेवलप हुआ कि कुछ सपोज बीमारी फैल रही है आपके कंपनी में, एंड बाय द टाइम यू नोटिस इट इज़ टू लेट, देन यू एनीवेज कांट डू एनीथिंग अबाउट इट. सो इफ़ यू रिमेंबर कि पुराने टाइम में वो लोग बोलते थे ना कि राजा वुड गो इन डिसगाइज अराउंड हिज एम्पायर एट नाइट टू फिगर आउट कि व्हाट इज़ द प्रजा एक्चुअली फीलिंग. This is another thing which also you have to do. So I to always believe in having like a your own channel of knowing what is happening on the ground, which where you have direct access, so that there is no color, and whatever reality first hand without via anything, so that if there is any risk, you will notice it before it becomes bigger and you can respond to it quickly.
So Avnish, thanks. This was fascinating to us. It just slipped away. I didn't even realize we are almost at the end of the time that we had
It's
allotted
like one
for
of
this
our
discussion.
regular conversations that we are sitting in this nice studio.
Yes, and we had more time to each other. But so in this whole conversation, if there is one point that you would want to re-emphasize for everyone who's hiring for their organization, who's building a business, that you would want them to take away, what would be that point?
I would say कि while you should learn from others, you should also not learn from others.
Okay.
Which means कि जो एक तरीका से चीज़ें हो रही हैं, जो एक्सेप्टेड व्यू है दुनिया का, अगर आप हर बार वही चीज़ करोगे तो आप अपनी इंडस्ट्री से आपको कम सीखना चाहिए, क्योंकि आप सारी चीज़ें अपनी इंडस्ट्री का ही फॉलो करोगे, बेस्ट प्रैक्टिसेस, देन यू विल एक तो नॉट गेट एनी एज और एनी एडवांटेज, एंड यू माइट बी टेकिंग द सेफर अप्रोच. सो दैट इज़ वेयर यू शुड copy less or learn less, and you should learn a lot more from people outside your industry, okay, because a lot of the answers to solve problems differently or to even solve problems will come from the outside world. So if I irrespective of which types of problems or what problems you're facing, I think this is something which enough people or most people don't do. We are so fixated saying, and which is why we value experience in the industry so much. So without getting into specifics, I would say as a general life principle, that is what people should do.
Very well noted. Nee, good. And I would also like to emphasize one more point. Hiring and building a team is a very, very tough decision. It is a very high involvement decision. In all the conversations that you said it's an iterative process. You spend a lot of time with the team in the same room. You have to try doing it till the time you have got it right. So I think another lesson which I would want everyone to take away from this whole conversation is that it's not easy and you have to be mindful and you have to put in a lot of effort to build the right kind of team. Don't
मतलब वो
think that
कोई भी कोर्स करके कि आप जाके भले हार्वर्ड यूनिवर्सिटी में पढ़ लो, वो
नहीं
एक
कर
ऐसी
सकते
चीज है कि करने से ही होगा.
और वो आउटसोर्स भी नहीं कर सकते टिल द टाइम यू
वो
हैव
मतलब
समवन
गाड़ी
डूइंग द
चलाने जैसा
मनी.
चीज है कि जितना भी थ्योरी आप सीख लो,
नहीं और करना पड़ेगा. यू कैन नॉट से कि मैंने कर लिया वो करेगा, मैंने उसको दे दिया वो करेगा. नहीं, you have to lead from the front in getting the good people. You have to spend time on that because one of our biggest challenges that we face is that you'll have a startup, the founder has raised 20 crores. वो क्या करेगा, एक चुन्ने पुन्ने HR को लेगा, कहेगा अब ये हायरिंग करेगा. Now this HR has not seen life, this HR has not seen business. They're very well meaning, they're working very hard, but they simply do not have the capability to assess what the business needs.
in fact I would one of the other things I would say is that people who want to be in HR also, right, they should also sometime in their life spend time on the business side,
Exactly.
so that they become better collaborators and they understand the problems for the business also better.
Yes.
And I've seen most of the people who do very well have had that stint. It's not कि आप बस HR के बारे में ही जानते हो. And I would to if given a chance I would only want to get people like that.
Which is slowly happening. It is not very common, but I think especially with colleges like ISB coming in, it is possible to get someone who has worked 7, 8 years, 9 years in a business role, then move to an HR role, or someone who was earlier in an HR this thing and now moving to an operator or a business role, which is something which the industry should welcome, and they should pay a premium for such people, very honestly. Okay, I think we are done. Thanks so much, Avnish. This was a
I
pleasure.
had equal fun.
And I'm sure that after you have read a couple more books, we'll do it again.
Yeah, anytime I'm open to having conversations like this with you anytime you want.
Okay, thanks a lot.